All right, for those of you who were with me for our regular scheduled time, you know my internet kept on breaking up, dropping on and off, and it just was not useful. So I decided this would be take 3 on this particular video. If anybody is watching for the first time, or if you've watched before, go ahead and make sure you send me any questions, any comments, thoughts, ideas you've had. All that stuff is useful for other people, and that's why we want to get them out there. All right, let us open with prayer. Blessed and loving Lord, we come before you thankful and honored by your offering to us this ministry of helping people know your love for them. We ask now for your inspiration. We ask for your guidance. And most of all, we ask that we be put in contact with those people who most need to hear this message. Amen. All right, let's go ahead and share screen. All righty, and we'll go from beginning. Well, this is our agenda for this session. What we're going to do is quickly try to review our goals, talk about why people don't already love us, ask what potential does my church have to reach people, and then talk about the overall process, put what we're really focusing on today in context. The detailed discussion when we get into that will be about how to get people's contact information, which is so essential. How do we build relationships? Once we got their name and phone number, what do we do with them? And then some final thoughts. And our particular goals are, we will remind ourselves of our goals, remind ourselves of our potential, remind ourselves of the entire process and its flow, and get to the point where we understand what it means to build a relationship. And my hope is you will be so excited that you'll want to drop everything else on your calendar and work only on this. And probably not. But what will not happen, and this is important not just for us to remember, but also because people we talk to in the congregation will have these questions. And you'll notice I very, very seldom use the word evangelism because of all the baggage that word has. So it's important to understand we will not be asking to stop random people on the street or just go knock on somebody's door and ask if they know Jesus. And we will not be expected to know all theology. If they ask us a question we don't know, that's fine. That's actually good, because that gives us a reason to bring them into community. So I love questions I don't know answers to. Our goal for reaching out to new people is not to increase attendance or budget, because Jesus never said anything about those. And focusing on attendance is trying to work with these things for our benefit, not for the other person's. Rather, our goal is to help other people grow closer to God. And if we do that, if we show God's love, it's likely our attendance and our budget will improve. The basic process, and it is the exact timing on this will vary from person to person. Obviously, everybody's unique, but we have to begin by seeking to connect with people we don't know. We can't do anything until we at least have some minor connection with them. And then we invite them to various things. And although Sunday services certainly is on the list, it is not at the top. They know we have Sunday services. We're trying to tell them about other things. And then we work on building that relationship, and we accept that's going to take months. One of the biggest problems that we run into is the leadership becomes discouraged because there's no obvious results after a few weeks. You know, the person on the vestry that says, we paid for 2 ads and I haven't seen one new person. We've got to get across, this takes time. It's not going to happen. Because if we want a relationship strong enough to talk about spirituality, that requires communication over time. You've all seen this slide before if you've done anything with me, and you know what I'm going to say. But I just don't want anybody getting to the point where they stop because they're feeling overwhelmed. Don't do that. Try to think about what you can do in your context. And this very much varies by church size. We have churches in this particular series with less than 20 on the normal Sunday and others with well over 200. Very different context. So particularly for the smaller churches, let me help you pick and choose one thing that you can do well. And then over time, we can add a couple others, but let's stay within what you can actually accomplish well. So why don't people love us? Why aren't they rushing into our churches? Well, and again, particularly most of us have congregations that are a little bit older, and they remember the 50s and the 60s when everyone was expected to go to church. And they wonder why that's no longer the case. And they won't come right out and say it, but they'll talk as if they think it's still the case. And maybe it was a good thing back then that everybody was expected to go to church. The church was the center of society and all that. But we just got to accept that's no longer true. We're in a different world, different society, different context. So what does church mean in 2022? When you talk to your next door neighbor who doesn't go anywhere and you use the word church, what are they visualizing? Well, these came up in just 1 week. Southern Baptist leaders try to make it so that no woman can be called a pastor for any reason. A preacher in England, if I remember right, said we'd be lucky if 6 million Jews actually had been killed in the Holocaust and everybody in a gay bar was shot. U.S. preacher probed after telling followers that the primary place for a woman is housework. And then finally, if there's one name that people will associate with the word Christian, it's the Falwells. Jerry Falwell was such a well-known name before, and now we're into the point where there's sex scandal that's involving him and his wife and a pool boy, and that's about the extent of what I know about it. And, particularly today, election day, church is dominated by politics, and this is both sides. This is not just one side or the other. It's both sides. And there are just too many of those examples for me to pick one. Would you want to be part of the group of people that those news reports described? I wouldn't. But what we need to remember, and what we know, is that's not a true picture of your church, but the unchurched, that's our primary audience, they don't know that. When you say St. Somewhere Episcopal Church, that's what they hear, is what was described in those slides. So we have to tell them and show them. We have to make sure they understand that's not us. But you also get the question, does my church have any potential to reach new people? Again, there's been lots of stories about how no one cares about church or Christianity anymore, but the answer is absolutely yes. If we're willing to make the effort to tell them about us, and if we're willing to take the time, it will work. And the good news is it's not hard, it's not expensive, it's not time consuming. I tell people all the time that if you can post on Facebook, you have 95% of the skills you need. And the other 5% you probably never need. So you're all set. Just very briefly, and I have a paper on this if anybody wants to see more, but just looking at the middle there, I'm sorry, what happened there? About 1 in 3 Americans, it could be 1 in 2, it could be 1 in 4, but somewhere in that ballpark, have an interest in deepening their spiritual lives and would talk to us if they honestly believe the conversation will be respectful. And what that requires is we have built a relationship that encourages such trust. So despite all those negatives we've talked about, 1 in 3 people near you are willing to talk to you. They're not anxious to do so. They're very cautious. They already have an overloaded calendar. They're not ready to attend church. But if approached correctly, they are willing to talk. The basic process is people must be intrigued. They got so much going on in their lives. Why should they spend a couple minutes thinking about church? We got to intrigue them to do that. And once they do, we have to get where they know us, like us, trust us, the most difficult one. And then they may interact with us. That means coming to something, again, probably not Sunday worship, but a more one-on-one conversation. and then maybe they'll relate with us. And all this, it can happen quickly. And my prayer is it will in your church. I'll have some people that'll happen very quickly, but most of the time it takes months. So right now, what we're going to be looking at is basically the last two parts of that, and primarily the last part, but also how they interact with us is important because it takes that interaction before we can relate to them. And what I just showed you is the chronological process, the order for many people, but we're going to talk about it in the stages by order of importance. And the most important stage is to build a relationship. Because if we never relate with them, we basically largely wasted our efforts. We have no way of influencing them if we don't have a way to contact them. So what are we talking about? Well, we begin with interacting with a new person. Now, if you remember, stage one was to intrigue them so they'll pay attention to us a little. And most people use the image of a funnel, that you have lots of people to start with and a few get somewhat interested. And then down at the bottom, you have a very few as a percentage, but actually a large number of people who get in contact with you. So notice it's worth the effort. You know, you may not get 10,000 people, but you may get 10 families. Isn't that amazing? And you're not likely to see an immediate impact on Sunday attendance, but over time we can. We won't see results in a few weeks, most likely. So stage two, which was interacting more directly to the people, you got someone's phone number and you touch base with them, probably through texting. You do something to connect with them. So say Thomas in Sanford is selling cookbooks. Good way to get a one-on-one contact. Holy Family in New Jersey offers Messy Church for Children. I love that title. They've had a lot of response. Several churches offer the opportunity to pray for loved ones on All Saints Day. Didn't get a lot of response on that, but got some. And most importantly, it told them what we're about. And yes, we gently, emphasize that word gently, make them aware of worship opportunities, but especially unusual ones, not just the basic Sunday morning, but the ones that they may not even know about, that they may not, let me plug that in, they may not even think about. So for example, St. Luke and St. Simon of Cyrene in Rochester, New York, does a jazz vespers. It's a lot of fun if you get a chance. I think it's first Friday in the month. St. Luke's in Long Beach, California, does a Taizé Compline. Great opportunity to talk to new people. The key is to think of those interactions as what they are. They're the worship, they're the book sale, they're the bazaar, whatever, and an opportunity to make a connection. And one of my roles will be to help you build that habit of asking, how can this thing I'm already doing be an opportunity to make a connection? Because we've wasted all our efforts if we don't get their contact information. Typically, less than 5% of first-time Sunday guests will be active in the church 1 year later. And that's kind of a standard number across mainstream Protestant churches. And actually, most people say it's lower than that. Furthermore, most of the ones that are active were church to begin with. They're people who had just moved into town or for whatever reason had been away from church, but their church is part of their life. They expect to go. On the other hand, the number who watched online, bought a cookbook, attended a bazaar, or whatever, and are active a year later, I've never seen any research on that, but I think we'd all agree it's a tiny, tiny, tiny number. But we can do better. We can do better. So how do we get their contact information? Well, the key is assertive, but never aggressive, which means ask, but never demand. And you may say, oh, well, we don't demand. Yes, we all do. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. This is kind of the end of stewardship season for most of us. And if you've ever taken any training in stewardship, you know the phrase, what you don't ask for, you won't get. It applies in stewardship. It applies in contact information. It applies just about all the way across the board. So what does not work well, because they're passive and not assertive, is sign-up sheets on the Bazaar checkout table. And I'm not saying you'll never get any, but you won't get very many, a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the potential. Website registration pages, unless it's a person who's already interested. If somebody's just kind of leafing through your website, the chance of them filling that out are pretty slim. Guest book in narthex, and that's what I did for years. So hear me criticizing myself. If the greeter or the host points it out when a new person comes in the door, you will get some results, but actually that's fairly aggressive. You think about it. I mean, this person has just come in the door. They've gotten this big smile. Hi, glad you're with us today. There's the book. Please go sign it. Well, where's their opportunity to say no? I mean, somebody's standing there staring at them, insisting they sign the book, insisting by physical presence, if not words. So in the first 5 seconds of contact, they're not feeling welcome. They're feeling forced. Plus the fact, asking to sign the book at the beginning before the service is like asking somebody to rate a restaurant before they've even seen the menu. And I'll have you an idea about how to do that better in just a moment. Now, my thought about those books is go ahead and have them available, because people, again, who come from a church background are going to expect them and look for them and fill them out. But don't say anything about them. Don't make them a big push. So what does work? I think most important is sign-up cards work well. And I'll show you that sign-up card, kind of a generic term. It can be electronic or it can be physical. More often than not, it's physical, but doesn't have to be. And the keys on it, and I'll give you a whole list in just a second, is minimal information. There's lots of research that shows the more information you ask for, the fewer people will fill it out. And frankly, a lot of churches ask for information, first of all, they don't need, and second, it's a little creepy. And you want to make it as easy as possible for them to do it. Give them a reason. And I know the semantics sound minor, but it really does make a difference. If I say to somebody, please fill out this card, then I'm asking them to do something before I tell them why, right? So lots of people, the first reaction, please fill out this card. No, I'm not going to fill out this card. But if I start by explaining, by offering something we would like to be able to share information about, then I'm making an offer and showing them how to receive that offer. Very different attitude. I like giving an incentive. Most churches have somebody who gives regularly to the food pantry or the homeless shelter or whatever. Talk to them and ask if they'd be willing to use their gifts to those places in this way, kind of get double bang for the bucks. And that gives you a wonderful reason to communicate with the new people. A couple days after they've been there, or, hi, Sam, just want to let you know $10 was given to the food pantry in your honor. Thank you very much. Blessings. What a great contact. And now the same cards can be used, and I'll show you a sample in a second, in lots of different ways. They can be used on Sunday morning. They can be used at various events. They can be used for a raffle drawing, for a vacation Bible school registration. Just explain what that particular card is for, but you use the same basic form. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I tried to explain all the reasons I put different things in. One thing that I realize is not on this slide that I now typically do is have an opt-out at the bottom, and I'll show you one with that in just a second. And that's particularly not so much for Sunday, but if you're using it at a bazaar or a raffle drawing or something like that. This is my favorite way to have them available in the church. And this is a large church in Greensboro, North Carolina. I would have been really interested to hear the quote discussion, unquote, when they talked about drilling holes in their pews to put in cup hooks. But you can get the glue ones that come right off with no trouble if you want to do it that way. They actually ask for too much information on their form. You can see from the size of the form. And I like to use, you'll see in what I wrote up, a pastel colored form, still light enough that you can write on it easily. but something it's easier to say, the yellow form in the pew. The size of their pews, I think they sat 10 people. They had one of these at either end and one in the middle. So you don't have to have a lot. And I fully know, I appreciate the fact most of these cards will be used by the parents to write notes or the kids to draw pictures. That's fine. We're not trying to get them all, if we get a few back, it's well worth the effort. And then couple options, and you'll see these again on the form I showed you, the QR code on the form. Make sure that goes to the sign-in page on your website, not the general first page of the website, because two reasons. One is they're probably doing this during church. You don't want to be distracted that long. But also, if they have to start fiddling through to try to find it, they're likely to, the heck with it. Get them to where it goes. And I'll talk about this in a minute. It really keep that form simple. And then I really like this text name to number. You have a phone number. You can get a Google number that works well for this. And that may be the only use you make it to. And people just say, text Ken to that number. All right. Then I know I've got his name. I got his number. I can start communicating. Most important, be assertive. Ask. The host can mention it as the people are coming in that it'll be in the pew. I don't think that hurts. I don't think it's all that essential. But most important, the worship leader can ask after the piece. This is a great time, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. And then online, banners during streaming, and again, I'll show you that in a second, can be a great way to connect, but also to turn your streaming experience from an audience to a participant. You can't go all the way with that, but you can move them a little bit away from being strictly the audience to being partially a participant. And that's really important. And then on the online, through Facebook, whatever, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but you have questions, the offers to pray I mentioned earlier, registrations, anything like that. You can come up with an excuse to get their contact information. So this is the worship leader ask, my thought on it. It takes 30, 35 seconds. And I like it right after the piece because people are still milling around a little bit. In most churches, what happens, the organist hits a couple notes and people settle down. But you got a little bit of time in there where you're not really disrupting the worship. I would suggest do it every week, even if you don't notice. Yes, for a couple reasons. One is, frankly, otherwise I would forget. If I was only going to do it 1 out of 3 weeks, I'd forget on that third week. It announces to the congregation that we expect guests and we want to treat them well. And it may even actually generate some conversation, which can be turned into a good discussion. But also people may not, in fact, lots of people don't fill out the form on their first visit. So if you're looking out there and you say, I've seen Ken a couple times before, that he's not new, so I'm not going to say anything. Well, Ken may never have filled out that form. So one of the things is to try to stay away from the phrase first time with us, because that is maybe their third time, but they've never left their information. So much better just say new with us. They think they're still new with us. We may or not, but they do, and that's what counts. And as I said before, phrase it as we want to give you something. Mention the incentive. Stress safety. And you notice I did that on the form, but also verbally. This is a big deal. Safety and privacy is a big deal right now in our society, and appropriately. And you got the QR code and cell phone options you can mention. And a special piece to everyone who is new to us with us today. We're glad you're here. We can give you some information about what's going on around here, and we would love to send it to you occasionally by text. We promise we won't spam you or we won't give your information away. And furthermore, a generous donor has offered to give $10 to the food pantry for every one of these forms we get in. So if you can, please complete this form. You'll find it on the pew in front of you, and put it in the basket or give it to me on your way out. Thank you. I think that will work. And then for the streaming, I hope you could have heard that. The same basic idea.
And a special piece to everyone who is new to us with us today. We're glad you're here. We hope we can give you some information about what's going on.
The idea there, of course, was to try to give people the option of filling it out. And I've actually found a system. It's called OBS, which seems to be, I don't have it nailed down completely, but seems to be a good way for people to go. It's free. It's relatively simple. And what you do is you write the, let me start that up again. Well, it'll start eventually. You write out the words, or it could be a photo. For example, you'd have a photo of the QR code ahead of time. And when you get to that part in the service, the operator simply taps on show contact information. Wait 30 seconds, hit stop show. That's all it takes. It's very, very simple. So what's going on? We want guests, or do we? And the answer is there's usually some resistance in most congregations. And it isn't that people don't want new people. It's they're not quite comfortable with what it'll mean. And we might as well expect that resistance and be prepared to answer it. And part of it is very understandable. There's been so many changes in our lives and in our churches. You know, people my age, you know, new prayer book, new hymnal, ordination of women, now acceptance of gays, acceptance of abortion. You know, and I'm not taking a stand on any of those. They're okay. But the point is that there's been a lot of changes, and people want stability. Most people like stability, and they fear that new people will bring change. And they don't understand, back to what I said earlier, they don't understand why you have to make an effort, why people aren't just coming in the door. And even though it's not happening, they still expect it's going to. And they certainly don't understand that how many people have a negative impression of churches. That's one of the reasons I always show those slides with the news comments, so people can see this is what that person down the street is seeing. And then particularly in a small church, people are busy, and they're an altar guild, they're a lay reader, and they're sitting on vestry, and when we talk about doing something else, all they can hear is that's more work for me. Well, there's some possible responses. First of all, as far as fearing the change, and make it clear we're not talking about, you know, having a rock band with drums or something like that. The basic, everything's going to stay basically the same. But also remind them of changes that have occurred as people have come and gone over the years. Acknowledge the grief. That's a very pastoral way to handle it. Acknowledge the grief that people feel about the church no longer being the center of society. And then tell them about my rule to not overwhelm themselves, but also rule number 2, if we do nothing, we get nothing. I remember standing in the parking lot with one of our founding members at a church I was serving, and she was going through a lot of this. She felt uncomfortable about, you know, reaching out to new people and all that. She just didn't understand why we need to do it. And I just looked at her and I said, the church started with 90 people. We now have 30. What we were doing wasn't working, and just didn't go any further, just left it there. So when the conversation does get on, and if you get a chance and you're talking about why we do these kind of things, begin with a focus on God and Scripture. But the second thing I have found can be very, very effective is most people, in fact, I'd say the overwhelming majority of people, think this world needs to change. It needs to get better. And we can say the best way for that to happen is if we can connect more people with God's love. And then, if none of that works, talk about the church budget. I hate to use that as a rationalization or a reason, but if it works, use it. All right, we want their contact information. We've gotten that far. How do we get it? Well, for in-person non-worship events, and think about the bazaar, the blessing of the animals, you know, anything along those lines. This is the most difficult situation, but it's also very important. It's difficult because you don't know who has asked the person before. You know, if you're the third person to ask the guest to fill out one of the cards, that's pretty aggressive. But it's hard to know what's going on. So a couple suggestions: find a reason to do an occasional announcement over a speaker or whatever. Mention the cards. That way the reminder about the cards is being made to the whole group, not to one individual. Find a reason to have a drawing. Use the cards as a submittal form. In those cases, I always do have the opt-out on the bottom. Very few people will use it. Find a reason to showcase something, and then have a learn more at those locations. So, for example, during the bazaar, have a station with information about child and youth programs. Always stress safety. That's the big thing right now. But one thing to do about that is your banner, your announcement about this place, turn it into something about safety and a question. How do we keep kids safe? Question mark. And then you might have something below, hear about our program or something like that. Questions always generate more response than statements. And the clever names like Messy Church kind of grab people's attention. And yes, have the cards available at every reasonable location with the pens and all that. But, the funny thing about, and I'm thinking bazaar, and I'm cleaned up after a bazaar, a yard sale, or whatever. It's such a haphazard time. Make sure somebody you can really count on is going around to collect those cards, because the last thing you want to do is lose them. You want to get them in, you want to get them to the right place. And yeah, I'm a bit paranoid because I would take photos of them before I handed them off to anybody. What about online and social media? As I said before, absolutely have a page on your website with a place for people to sign up, but keep it simple. Same rule applies. The more you ask for, the fewer people will fill it out. Now, if you want, you can add an open text box. That's probably a good idea. Something about other information you like to share. And then they might tell you they have 3 kids that go to middle school or something. But asking the children's name and birth and age, or a couple churches I've been at asked the birthday, that's creepy. That's just plain out creepy. We can get that information later. On all these things, find a reason for people to respond to you. Asking for prayers for a certain circumstance, with a form that gets their information. Just saying fill in a comment or message is okay, but it doesn't provide you with the contact. Now, if Ken sends you a request for prayers, you on a comment or whatever, yes, you can respond to me, but you don't have any way to continue that conversation. Giveaways are great. Mention the cookbook. Questions are always good. Run a poll for the 3 Christmas carols they want to make sure are included. Now relax. You're going to still set up the bulletin. I mean, they're not going to tell you what to include. But you give them a chance to have them input, and almost certainly 2 of the 3 they select are ones you're going to do. I mean, there's a pretty standard set. Then a couple days before Christmas, you send them a text saying, "Hi, Ken, you responded to our poll, wanted to let you know what we are doing, maybe attach the bulletin or just have a list. Hope you can come and sing with us." Learn more can work online. Wondering what Godly Play is? Always a question. If you can, Godly Play is a program for children's Sunday school. I'd probably say a few things about it, again, emphasizing safety, a couple photos without the children's faces, and then offer to send the upcoming schedule. Gives them a reason to send you their information. You can take a poll for upcoming adult education series. And again, you aren't setting yourself up here. Go ahead and come up with the 2, at least 2, obviously, or 3 topics you're comfortable leading a class on, and then offer those. If you get an overwhelming suggestion toward one, follow it. But if not, pick the one you want to do. but then you can offer to keep them informed about what is being taught and the calendar and all that kind of thing. Make it sound interesting, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. Always do it in a way that gets you the contact information. One of our churches just did something, 94 responses, fantastic. Both likes and loves and comments. 94 people like what they put out, and they didn't get a single contact. Not one they can follow up with. You are doing things worth talking about. Stop and absorb that for a moment. You are doing things worth telling other people about. What are they? How can you tell them? All right, I like Jotform online. I am looking at something Facebook now offers, which seems to be similar. I will let you know if it seems to work out. But I like Jotform for 3 reasons. One, it's free. Love that word. Second of all, it's easy. Love that word. And third, it'll download into an Excel file so you can keep track of what's going on. I like that too. But you can see very simple: name, email. I usually ask the email, even though I'm going to use the text, because there'll be people who will only give you their email, and I don't want to miss them. The one thing that's not in here that I normally do include is zip code, and that's simply so I know if they're in the immediate area or not. And even you aren't absolutely sure then, but it gives you an hint. And then there's please tell you whatever this particular one is about, just a text box, and you'll see I do have the opt-out option below. All right. As I mentioned, when you're talking about anything, but here I'm going to focus primarily on Christian education, primarily adult. In all honesty, a lot of the stuff we put out, it sounds like we're not interested ourselves. Remember, the goal is to intrigue them. If they already were absolutely convinced they wanted to come to a Bible study, we wouldn't have to say anything. So something like this is what we normally do. Bible study Sunday 9:30 a.m. We haven't really given out any particular information. That unchurched, they assume we do Bible study from time to time, and they don't want to walk into just a general unspecified time. So try to do something that intrigues them. Here's a great one. It's from Lutheran Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. The 3 most intriguing characters in John. Well, the first thing I see is an image that I'm going to pay attention to. My eyes are going to come up to the headline and say, "Oh, intriguing. Huh? Let me read a little more about that." So it's the same course. It's just presented in a little more interesting way. But the one I love the most is this one. Who's not going to stop and look at this and read what above it? And then when you read it, the one before he used the word intriguing, this one he used weirdest. I'm curious. I want to know what he's talking about. And then I didn't show it all, but down below it has all the details and stuff like that. Grab their attention. All right, we have their attention. We have their contact information. What do we do with all this? Well, I think the basic rules are that communication should be frequent, but not so much that it's spam. Short, friendly, informative, never pushy, occasionally funny. Think about kind of how you might interact with somebody new at the office or in a civic club or in the neighborhood or something, kind of that level. I strongly recommend texting. I don't get any money for that. It just makes more sense. It's glanced at least 90% of the time. And I'll show you a couple little tricks that'll even raise that higher. Emails are opened, not necessarily read, but at least opened about 20% of the time in most circumstances. Most businesses are ecstatic if they hit 30%. So we're ending up with, just to begin with a lot more. The other interesting thing is texting requires us to be short. You only get so many characters. So we have to be very short and we have to be very focused. Now, I think about once a week keeps it regular, but not spam. Now, there may be times like Easter and Christmas, times like that you may want to send to. Keep a list of only relatively new people. I would have one group of, now, if you want to use everybody, you want to do it with everybody in the congregation, that's fine, but that should be a second list. And the reason for that is those newest people don't want to hear about the vestry meeting. They don't want to hear about the cleanup day, that kind of thing. We want to keep them focused. They're not yet ready to hand in their pledge card, the things you would tell the regular members about. I would suggest a mix of topics, something like the What is the Episcopal Church video, which is great. And then something church specific. Friday night is our game night, that type of thing. Many texts can also be used both as posts and ads in addition to text. And I have the YouTube there if you want to see some of the videos that are available. I'll also send you out one that shows you what I mean about putting a closing slide on. The goal continues to remain to intrigue them. All right, we've got a very gentle touch to them, and it's very easy to lose that. So we want to continue to involve them, intrigue them. And you're not going to get a lot of response. You may get none. That's not the issue. Now, occasionally go ahead and ask a question like prayers for All Saints Day or carols for Christmas to try to generate a little bit of discussion, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to keep that light connection with them. And here's some samples of ones that I've sent out for other churches. And you'll notice as you go through, there's a couple that are primarily fun, like the Mexican train night, which is a form of dominoes. I didn't know that. I had to look it up. One's about education, one's about social or outreach, friend's house, and then the short video explaining the Episcopal Church. So that's the kind of thing. You'll notice at the very beginning, it has that first name. One of the advantages of having a system, a service that does this for you, there's lots of advantages, but one of them is it'll automatically insert the person's first name if you ask. And, if you look at your cell phone, you can see when a text comes up, 3 or 4 words. If the first word's your name, you're most likely going to look on. Also, if you notice in blue there, those are long links to specific videos or specific websites. A service will shorten that for you so you aren't using up all your characters in one web link. I think the texting service is the best way to go, and it's easier than you think. As I said, get a service and it allows you to personalize, schedule your work, all that kind of thing. Now, many electronic giving systems such as Tithely include texting, but be careful. Make sure it does the things like two-way texting, scheduling your work, all that kind of thing before you depend on them. My process is once a month, look at the calendar for the United States, for the Episcopal Church, and your church. Note possible topics for each week. For the United States, it might be a holiday like Labor Day or something like that. For the Episcopal Church, it might be something like, a Saints Day that I particularly want to mention or something like that. And then your church, what's going on. And just like I say, once a month, once every 6 weeks, just make a list, note possible topics. Take just a couple minutes. And rough out some text. These are the points I want to make about that. You're going to refine it later. And then Monday or Tuesday each week, build in a 5 minutes to review, polish, and publish. Now, I typically publish on Friday, sometimes on Saturday, it just depends. And again, it's all scheduled. So if you do something on Monday or Tuesday and you want to make a change, you still got time to make a change. It's just you don't have to worry about it. So in a few cases, texting will not work. You may have only gotten their email or you may have only gotten their landline number. Just follow up best you can. You just got to do the best you can. If you only have a landline number, I'd call them. Now, most likely you'll end up leaving a message because most people don't answer unknown phone numbers anymore. But you do what you can. And whenever possible, ask a question that kind of encourages the response. If you say, if you have any questions, let me know. most people are going to, unless they have a really burning question, they're not going to do anything with it. If you say, I have time Tuesday morning to have coffee, when can I meet you? That is a little more assertive and they're more likely to get a response. And anytime a child attends, and especially if it's something like nursery or Sunday school, but anything at all, try to send the child a letter in the post office, through the post office. Because they're not likely to get many of those. Maybe birthday cards, but not much else. Now, that does mean asking the parents for the address, but most of the time, if you start out by explaining, we would like to send little Johnny a quick note and maybe even show them what the card looks like. Most of the time, parents will provide. If they don't, back off. Just don't worry about it. Now, I haven't been able to find them for a while, but they used to have cards around that would allow you to record your voice. And if you can do that and send it to the child with a handwritten note, of course, they're going to be your friend. They'll love it. They'll love it. And the parents will hate you because they'll play it over and over again, but the kids will love it. And that's what counts. All right. How can I help you with this? Well, I want you to know this is my joy and my ministry, this whole process. And we are blessed that Shirley, my wife, supports all this. And, my joy is in your success. Holy Family in New Jersey had 5 new contacts this week through their messy church. St. Luke's in California had guests at their blessing of the animals, as did other churches. Epiphany in North Carolina had a wonderful turnout of their blessing of the animals. And I happened to get a chance to be there. And what I was doing, I was watching their neighbors, the homes around them, and people kept on coming out, looking over. They were learning that this church is alive, and that's wonderful. St. Joseph's in Georgia says they've had at least 20 guests this year, which is an increase. They're a small church. 20 guests in a year is a lot. And at least half of them have returned. Now, if you're a larger church and you have the resources to contribute $5 to $10 a month to help with expenses, that's great. That's wonderful. We'll never turn it down. But that's not required. I don't request it from smaller churches. I know what that budget's like. And I have a contact with Simple Texting. That's a service I've chosen that allows me to send out text for you. If there is a response, that is not, very simple. If somebody just asks what time is the potluck supper or something, I can do that. But if it's anything at all, particularly anything pastoral, I just immediately send it on to you. I don't take over your job. And what I do is basically a process I just talked about trying to look through things and say what might be a good text. And then I rough something out and I send it to you and you approve it. You'll see the Reverend Dan Wall's name on a lot of this soon. He's going to be helping me, and that'll also allow us to expand our suggestions so that it's not just texting, it's also Facebook posts or whatever. Well, it's a typo there, isn't there? All right. Key point, respond. Have you ever thought about this? When somebody gives you their name, it's like they say hello to you. Well, if somebody says hello to us, we respond. And we don't respond days later. So we need to keep it as reasonably close without being creepy or aggressive. And the first response can be very, very simple. I mean, it can be cut and paste if you want to do that. Thank you for being with us. We will send you more soon, but do you have any specific questions? Blessings. If possible, let the clergy be their name on there. If it's not, probably nobody's name, unless it's somebody they're bound to know. It'll take you 15 to 30 seconds per text. I mean, it just doesn't take long. And if you get 2 guests in one Sunday, that's pretty darn good. And if you get 10 names out of Bazaar, that's pretty darn good. So it's not going to take long. I strongly recommend you do it right away, or it's so easy for it to be forgotten. Doesn't mean you send it right away. So like I would do it at noon on right after the second service on Sunday, and then but schedule it to go out like at 7 o'clock, because you don't want them to get a text while they're still in the car. That's the evangelical churches will do that, but I feel like that's kind of pushy. Always assertive, not aggressive. we will be giving them multiple times to opt out, including every single text they get by law as that stop option. And finally, this is a change of thinking for me. But I really get more and more convinced that if somebody gets annoyed because of something simple, like I asked them for names for All Saints Day, they weren't going to stick around anyway. I mean, let's face it, the majority of people in town are not going to come into your church no matter what you do. You know, we're aiming for a double of attendance or membership, maybe a tripling at best. That still leaves most of the people in town now. So I know I used to be all concerned that if I said something, I'd annoy somebody. Well, now I think about it, and if they got a reason to be annoyed, I change it. But if they're just going to be annoyed because they don't care, they don't want to be part of us, I'm more concerned about the person who's annoyed because we, in current jargon, ghosted them. We're like a ghost. They're unseen and we're unseen. And finally, our inspiration. What should we be thinking about as we're trying to think of this whole process and what's involved and all that? The Costco sample lady. We were at Costco and I got thinking about this. I don't know how many hundred people walked by her and never even give her a glance. And then a few stop and, maybe find out what she's offering as far as samples go. And of those few who stop, a couple buy. Well, Costco and Sam's Club and all those other wholesale places, they're well-run businesses. They have studied this and they say this effort is worth investing the money in. And it's back to that funnel example I talked about. Well, we've got the same circumstance. We'll have thousands that will see us. A few percentage of that will get a little bit intrigued, and a smaller, but we'll end up actually with an effort that's worthwhile, with plenty of people who were thankful we made that effort to contact. So anyway, any questions or anything, I'll leave my information on the screen. Please let me know. Blessings on your efforts.